Lawyers of Reddit, what's the stupidest case you've been asked to take on, and did you? Story 1. I am a personal injury lawyer in the United Kingdom. I took a call from a potential client that had fallen down the stairs in her own home. She had tripped over her own cat. She told me that she wanted to sue her local authority, as her home was owned by the council, and she was not allowed to keep pets as part of her lease. She claimed that when the house was inspected, she was not told to get rid of the cat. It was therefore the council's fault that she fell down the stairs. We didn't take the case on. Story 2. Not really stupid but unbelievable. My friend at work, his girlfriend filed for divorce a few weeks ago. That's right. They aren't married, and common law doesn't apply in Washington state. They lived together for 5 years. She has a job. She isn't on the mortgage. And she left him a few months ago. There are no kids involved. They were never engaged. In the divorce, she wants him to leave his house and she wants to move back in. She wants him to pay her $2,800 a month for some reason. I referred him to my divorce attorney, and now that attorney is probably going to represent him. The chick is nuts. She has already tried to get a restraining order against him that was dismissed. Story 3. As a paralegal who just, luckily, got away from a family law office to a defender's office, this gave me a migraine. I've seen some very stupid things in family law, but this? They aren't married, and common law marriage doesn't apply in almost any state at all, due to how hard it would be to enforce in the first place. She actually filed, saving this comment for later. Comment 1. Yes, she filed and had him served via certified mail and claimed he was avoiding service because he wasn't home for several days. She put all kinds of things in the divorce paperwork that don't belong. In the dismissed restraining order, she said she wanted her furniture and this and that. She is representing herself and is from Guatemala. She is clueless. Story 4. I dealt with a guy once who wanted me to take on his road traffic accident personal injury claim. He had written a poem in Yoruba about the accident. He refused to tell me anything about his case until he's read the whole thing in Yoruba. Among other problems, I can't speak any fucking Yoruba. As in, not one word. As in, that day was the first time I had ever heard of the Yoruba language. I'm not even from a part of the world where I might readily be mistaken for someone who speaks Yoruba. It's a West African language, and I am really obviously not from a West African background. I try to explain this to the guy who becomes very agitated and insists that he must read out his poem in Yoruba. I give up and tell him to get on with it so we can talk about his claim. He does. It takes him nearly 20 minutes to finish. Anyway, after he's done, he finishes and sits back with a big smile and says that he's certain I'll take his case on now. I begin to ask him some questions about his case, but he refuses to answer. He says that this poem, in Yoruba, is everything I need to know about his case. Basically, I tell him to fuck off and stop wasting my time. He does, but not before standing around outside my office for an hour or so, reading out his poem to no one in particular, over and over again, in Yoruba. Story 5. Client wanted to sue because there were no strawberries in her fruit salad, which she bought from a supermarket. Thankfully, a secretary was able to screen the call. She asked if the package said it had strawberries, and the response was, "No, but I thought it would have." I don't know how these people manage to make it through life. Comment 1. Sometimes they win cases like this. That gives them capital and confidence to do it again. That is how they make it through. It's like those overly obnoxious customers who yell and scream to get free stuff. They do it because it occasionally works. And they have no shame. Comment 2. I once had an old man who refused to pay, even though I had asked him the important questions for a dinner reception, wedding dinner for about 50 tables. Did you know what you ordered before the reception? Did you know how much in total the price of what you ordered before the reception? Did you know the amount you ordered resulted in more than what others have typically, resulting in a slightly more expensive price? He answered yes to all 3. Still claimed the food should have tasted better. Bigger prawns with better quality ingredients, for example. For the price he paid, even though he knew what to expect, there were plenty of leftover because the food tasted bad. even though I pointed out there was barely any left over, and it was a considerably feat, given the amount he ordered. Etc. Honestly, it was just easier to discount and blacklist him. Story 6, without going into too many details, had a guy that wanted to bring a class action against the company that made his underwear, because he was convinced his underwear was the reason he had a crooked private part. He assured us that as soon as the jury saw his private part, they'd side with him. No, we didn't take it. Story 7, I was working in a law firm and got a call from reception advising that someone had arrived needing some intellectual property advice. I arrived at reception to find a clearly disturbed woman with a persistent facial twitch and a small wheeled suitcase. I took her to a conference room to discuss, making sure I kept a good line of sight to reception. She put the suitcase on the table and opened it to reveal a stack of thousands of handwritten pages and 1/2 of a pair of scissors, so I guess a scissor. She explained that she had written a manuscript about how the city council gave her schizophrenia and hepatitis, aliens stole her pets, and that it was all part of a bigger conspiracy involving the army and the Illuminati. She was worried that our local newspaper was going to steal her thoughts and publish her manuscript without her consent, and wanted to register the copyright in her manuscript. We then had a perfectly rational and reasonable discussion about copyright laws. I explained that in our jurisdiction she didn't need to register it, and that she had rights as an author automatically on creation of the work. I told her the most useful thing she could do is ensure she had evidence of her creative work, and that she should send a digital copy to herself and a friend, and also leave a copy with a friend. That way, if it was published without her consent, she could prove it was her work. We spoke for nearly an hour. She thanked me and then left. She got free legal advice, and I didn't get stabbed with a scissor. I hope she found the help she needs. Edit. Assume this would get buried. I was a junior, and just tried to treat the client with respect and empathy. Scissor gave me pause but never felt in danger. Was relieved she had a real legal question, and we focused on that rather than her delusions, and in that sense it wasn't a stupid case. I will say this, as a society, we don't do enough to look after our most vulnerable people, including those with serious mental health issues. Story 8, my father is a patent attorney, and when I was around 14, he told me about a guy who wanted to patent the iPhone 3 because aliens had given him the design for it. My father told him that if the aliens originally designed, then they were the ones that had to patent it. Not him. Story 9, a guy found a rock in the middle of Melbourne's central business district that he believed came from an underground volcano, therefore he discovered the volcano, and he owned the volcano, and that the Melbourne City Council and indeed the Victorian government should pay him rent to live on top of his underground volcano. No, I did not take on the case. Story 10, I run a consumer advocacy firm. I had a client come in and tell me that he bought a product, and the company refused to honor the warranty after the product broke. I asked for details, and he just started screaming in my face asking if I was going to take his money or not. I decided then that I wasn't taking him on as a client, but I wanted to know what was going on. I convinced him to tell me what happened. Turns out he bought a computer back in the 1990s. It had just recently died. But not because it was old and just stopped working. It was slow, so he picked it up and threw it out a 2-story window. And then he wanted to sue the manufacturer for breaking warranty. Story 11, lawyer for 12 years. Client was charged with stealing a mobile toilet. After we won, he told me he still owns it. The fucker has the thing in his backyard because he was lazy as fuck. His office was nearby. Forced him to deliver it back at night. Jesus. Still offended that he lied to me the whole time. Story 12, my dad is an in-house lawyer for a major American insurance company. He once spent an entire year trying to help deny insurance benefits for a painter who had stepped off his ladder onto a cat, fallen down the stairs and become paralyzed. The insurance company was arguing that a cat was a commonly expected occupational hazard for a painter, and that he was negligent in not checking for cats before stepping down. A whole year of his life. Over whether a cat is a known occupational hazard of house painting. Story 13NB. This is pretty graphic, so you might want to skip this one if you don't have a strong stomach. A guy who cut off all of his fingers would be a serious contender. He clearly had some really awful mental illness. I assumed schizophrenia or psychosis, but I never really found out what his deal was. Anyway, he had decided one evening that a good way to get some money would be to break into a butcher's shop and use a meat saw to severely injure his hands, which is pretty much exactly what he did. He was found the next morning, somehow having survived. He was put in a mental health facility and made a pretty much full, albeit with permanent injuries, recovery. Anyway, he wanted to sue someone. He didn't really know who he wanted to sue. He had just got it into his head that if he was injured, he would get compensation. I remember his biggest question was whether he would get more money if he went back and injured his feet as well. If you or someone you know is going through a tough time, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and you don't have to go through it alone. Story 14. I never did much criminal defense, but a man, who we'll call Dennis, came into my office with a driving while intoxicated charge and aggravated unlicensed operation of a motor vehicle charge, both misdemeanors. Dennis swore up, down, and sideways that 1. He does not drink and was not intoxicated, 2. He never drove the vehicle, and 3. That he has a valid driver's license. I give Dennis the names of some local criminal defense and driving while intoxicated attorneys and suggest he try them out. Dennis refuses, saying I'm the lawyer he wants. In hindsight, I should have realized that he probably had already gone to these other attorneys and only came to me after they refused to take his case. I charged the guy $200 for an intake and record review fee and contact the local court, police station, and district attorney's office for information and paperwork. I find out that not only did this guy blow a .18 on the breathalyzer, but the cops did a blood test on him after he kept insisting he wasn't drunk. The blood test came back with a .22 blood alcohol content. As for driving, the separate squad cars witnessed Dennis's vehicle run over a mailbox and drive off. He was followed and pulled over on the block. Per the police report, Dennis was the only person in the car and was in the driver's seat with a seat belt on. Oh, and I tracked down his license through the Department of Motor Vehicles, and it had expired 3 years ago, and was suspended for 2 years prior to that. I called Dennis back into my office and told him he did not have a case that should be taken to trial. Dennis admitted that he probably had been drunk, but he wasn't aware he had been drinking. His son must have put Fireball whiskey in his green tea, and he didn't realize there was whiskey in his green tea, because he was eating red-hot cinnamon candies and had a cold, stuffy nose. Anyways, Dennis retains me, but only after I put a clause in his engagement agreement stating I explained his low chance at trial, and he understood there was no guarantee of a win. I take the case to trial, and of course, we lose. I was hoping to convince Dennis to take one of the plea offers given to us in advance, but absolutely not. Dennis was sure the judge would understand. Dennis wanted a bench trial, not a jury trial. I made him sign another document later on that said he understood the difference between a bench and jury trial, and he was opting for the bench trial, and he would be found not guilty and everyone would move on. He was sorely disappointed, but only got probation after trial. I think the judge was taking pity on me more than Dennis. Dennis later sued me for his retainer because I didn't adequately defend him. As proof of my inadequate representation, he offered the judge's verdict rendering him guilty. The case was thrown out quickly. Story 15. I'm a lawyer, but this happened to a friend of mine. He got engaged, and apparently this pissed off his ex-girlfriend. The ex-girlfriend sued him for custody of their 2 cats and $500,000 for something like the lost value of the cats because she claimed they were service animals. Hint: they were not at all service animals. Edit. Wow, this got a lot of attention. So, to add to the story, one of the reasons my friend broke up with the ex-girlfriend was because she had problems caring for the cats, ignoring them, forgetting to feed them while my friend was away, etc. So her coming back for the cats was clearly all about the fact that my friend was suddenly engaged to someone else. When they went to court, the judge immediately threw out the $500,000 demand, because it was ridiculous. Unfortunately, They were awarded joint custody of the cats, which was this woman's way of staying in my friend's life. So he decided it was better if he just gave her the cats so he could be free of her. Story 16. I did insurance defense for a long time, including insurance fraud investigations for insurance companies. You wouldn't believe how many people take a video inventory of their house only to have it mysteriously burn down the next day. You really can't fix stupid. Comment 1. So, how long prior to the fire should one video the inventory of one's home? Asking for a friend who just got a new video camera and likes to smoke in bed. Comment 2. It's not like there aren't multiple better options. Get a new pet and take several videos of them all through the house, or pretend like you're making a video for someone else and discussing renovations, or make a prank video for YouTube. Deciding to burn your house down shouldn't be a one-day thing. A person would have to save the irreplaceable stuff like family photos and put them in either a fireproof box or somewhere you can give yourself time to remove. Then they would have to hide some of the smaller expensive things that they can claim without proving they did in fact burn down. Getting a storage unit or hiring movers right before it burns down is another good way to get caught. They also should think about where your family, pets are going to stay while you're waiting to be reimbursed. But again, buying those beforehand is a big no-no, plus they should probably also make sure they actually have insurance that covers the fire. But the problem is a person can't just inquire about fire coverage, then burn it down the next day. That's a dumb way to get caught. It would have to be planned out months in advance, like say they're looking to change coverage. A good idea would be actually lowering coverage a small amount, though they do have to make sure it covers fire without specifically questioning it. They probably should make sure they're actually going to come out on top in the deal, though spoilers, that maximum 5 to 10K extra reimbursement is not going to cover your extraneous costs. Not that it matters if a person is already crazy enough to consider and plan out burning down your house for the insurance money. Story 17. I'm a prosecutor. So I don't get hired to represent anyone. I work for the government. But I do have discretion over how the prosecution progresses. That is, deciding to proceed, deciding what to offer in the event of a plea bargain, deciding to withdraw the charges, etc. I had a case a few months ago where a man was charged with shoplifting. Turned out he was 70 years old, had absolutely no criminal record, and had shoplifted a sandwich which he ate politely in the store. He honestly thought he had paid for it. I was so angry that he was ever charged in the first place. When I saw him in court, he was absolutely terrified. I withdrew the charges and wished him well. I have no idea how it progressed that far. Comment 1. You may think that, but you've just made the world a better place for the rising tide of criminal activity by gangs of vicious septuagenarian sandwich thieves. You'll be sorry when you are no longer able to have your lunch safely in a public park. Damned do-gooders. Story 18. Let me preface this. I had heard about the guy I'm going to mention below before I had actually met him. I thought this was an urban legend until he came into my office one day. A guy in his late 50s, early 60s comes into the lobby area of my office and starts a commotion that freaks out the receptionist. I was the closest attorney to the lobby, so I go out and talk to the guy. He was clearly mentally disturbed and presented the following story. Someone had implanted a device in his brain that was controlling his behavior. He believed it was being controlled by Baskin-Robbins and a former mayor of Detroit. He believed they were forcing him to do random things like going to bars to drink, taking the wrong turn when driving, forcing him to retire from his job, and a lot of very other intricate things. After asking him if he had seen any doctors regarding the implant, he got really upset and said that he thought the doctors were in on it as well. After telling him I couldn't help him and suggesting that he find some new doctors, he asked me if I knew any lawyers who specialized in his kind of case. I often wonder if the lawyer I referred him to was able to help him. Story 19. I had a client come in saying that he needed to sue Stu for robbing all his checks. When I asked him if Stu had a last name, he said no. When I asked him if he knew any Stu, he said no. When I asked him what proof he had that Stu was robbing him, he showed me all of his pay stubs. There were clear monthly deductions by SCU. As soon as I saw it, I knew. I asked, "Do you have children?" He said yes. I then told him, "Your STU is the SCU, the Support Collection Unit. They take money out of your check to pay for your child." He left the office insisting that we needed to find Stu. Story 20 guy was arrested for marijuana possession. Arresting officer never actually opened the tinfoil bundle involved and checked that it was, in fact, not a burrito. Edit. Judge tossed the case. It was a misdemeanor. They don't go crime scene investigation and reach back to any collected evidence, just roll their eyes and let everyone go home in situations like this. Story 21 I'm in immigration, so most of my stupid cases involve people trying to con the system or forgot to tell us material information. One lady stood out though. She was referred to us as a pro bono case. She was filing for asylum based on the fact that she's a Chinese national, and she's also a devout Christian. If she was sent back, she would be persecuted based on religious reasons. So nothing weird up to this point. She provided me with statements about how she and her family were harassed by the local police and how certain members of her congregation were arrested. So I'm looking at the statements, and the names and places sound familiar. Sure enough, a quick Googling showed this was one of the bot stories. Essentially what happens is, there are people on the internet that sells these packages of fake documents and stories for a successful asylum case. From what I've heard, it usually is a real case that was successful, and someone got a hold of the supporting documents and started mass-producing them and selling them. I'm guessing you're supposed to change the names from the original, but this lady didn't. Another red flag was the fact that in her supporting documents, the witnesses kept referring to her in the male form. At first I thought the English translation had typos, but yeah, same thing in the original Chinese ones. I always thought it was more of an urban legend amongst immigration lawyers. Needless to say, I did not take her case. Story 22 I have a friend who's a lawyer. One time, he worked a custody battle for a man following his divorce. The primary argument was that his ex-wife was a very difficult person and would negatively impact the development of the children. The evidence consisted of statements from co-workers, Facebook arguments, and a list of homeowners association complaints she filed for frivolous things. He said it was a legitimate case, but everything about it was so petty and stupid. The guy won. Story 23 probably too late here, but I was a civil rights investigator. We had one guy complain that he was fired from his factory job because of his race. He was black. Owner of the factory said it was because the guy was using illegal substances on his lunch break. Turns out he was using illegal substances on his lunch break, but so were a few of his white coworkers and they were not fired. The owner agreed to pay the guy 6 months of back pay and give him a neutral reference. Story 24 When I was in law school, I did the criminal defense clinic where we help a public defender. I say help because they just give you small cases to do by yourself. I had a guy accused of shoplifting a yellow FUBU shirt. Guess what he wore to the trial? A goddamn yellow FUBU shirt. I asked the prosecutor to reoffer the plea deal. She did, and I convinced the guy to take community service and probation, if I remember correctly. Our public defender system is tragically overworked and underfunded. Story 25 I've been a lawyer for 9 years. And the best case so far was this elderly fellow was kicked out of a library for making an obscene gesture to every black librarian he saw. He tried to sue the library, and I was his legal consultant. Didn't take the case, but I advised him that he would get a better outcome by avoiding libraries altogether and not trying to sue the only people who will crush him in court, bar none. Story 26 I had a teacher that worked for a major video game publisher, one of the top 10 ones. He told me that when people tried to sue them for small amounts due to some game being bad, they would just pay whatever the person wanted. It was cheaper than dealing with the country's terrible justice system. Except one day a guy sued them because a game was bad. He was a law student, self-representing, and tried to throw the book at the company. They decided to make an exception for this guy. They instead threw the book back at him. The lawsuit kept escalating until both sides wasted lots of time and money. Then, as final stroke, they offered to settle in front of a judge. They're in front of the judge. They put the price of the game on the table in cash, and told the guy to just take it and stop bothering them. The judge thought it was very fair, and told the guy that if he refused that settlement he would be fined. Guy was very unhappy. He spent like $5,000 in bureaucracy and airplane fares to get $60. Story 27. I worked as a receptionist at a small personal injury firm and was the first line of defense against the more outlandish cases. One of the most ridiculous calls I took involved a woman wanting to sue her cat's veterinarian for malpractice because her cat scratched her, which in turn supposedly caused her liver to fail and a slew of other health problems to arise. She believed the vet was at fault because she was convinced the cat was carrying some obscure disease and the vet had failed to catch it. It was my second day on the job, so I put her through to an attorney, not yet knowing what else to do with such a ridiculous situation. She got a firm "sorry, can't help you" from our office, in part because we did not do malpractice, veterinary or otherwise, but also because she sounded like a one-way ticket to Crazy Town. Edit. As some have pointed out, the woman may have actually had cat scratch fever, which could in theory lead to a legitimate claim. However, when she called, she presented it as, "I got sick, and then someone told me it was from my cat. My vet never told me my cat was sick. Can I sue him for malpractice?" And apparently vets do not regularly test for cat scratch fever unless you bring your cat in for certain symptoms. This was clearly, and I see a chance for a cash payout situation, and we would get calls like that all the time with both bizarre and banal stories behind them. Either way, she would have needed someone more specialized than the firm I worked for, which primarily handled car accidents and zero cats. Story 28. Not a lawyer, but lawyer friend and neighbor told me yesterday of a guy whose client is being sued, trying to turn this into a class action suit to boot over chicken wings. The claim is that the 10 wings in his order actually constitute only 5 wings, because there's 2 edible parts to a chicken wing. In chicken anatomy class, this would be true. In restaurant chicken wing business, not so. Story 29. Worked as information technology for a family law firm. One day, a lady comes in asking to have an attorney look at her divorce. She goes in with the lawyer and tells him she wants the divorce on the grounds that he was beating her. The attorney explained that he would be willing to do it, but advised that because the marriage was so short, just a few months, the easiest way to get a divorce and get away from her abuser was just to file a no-fault and get it over with. She starts yelling, throwing things at and hitting him, mind you. He is an older guy in his late 60s at this point, telling him that if she could get 4 other divorces from him, then she could do it a 5th. She had married and divorced the same guy 4 times before this. The firm didn't take the case, but our sister firm, what we called the firm our firm split off of, did take on the guy's case. Turns out she had actually been the abusive one, basically holding him and their kids hostage, with threats of telling the police he was harming the kids and beating her. Story 30. Sometimes you have no choice but to take it. I represented a guy who sold and leased cars. Woman worked for a company that let her drive a company van to work as part of a carpool effort. She'd keep the van at home and picked up fellow workers to go to work, then bring them back to their homes. One day going to work, she was stopped at a stoplight. Some guy didn't stop in time and bumped into the van. She got out to look. She and the other guy agreed no damage, so each went on her way. Later, a woman who as a passenger discovered she was injured. Went to a lawyer. The lawyer sued the company, the driver, and every passenger in the van. The lawyer deposed each passenger, got the name of their auto insurance company, sent a demand letter for coverage. One of the passengers said, "I don't have a car." "But my sister does," so they sued the sister. She said, "I don't have insurance because I lease the car and they provide insurance." So the lawyer sued my client and sent a demand letter for insurance coverage. Story 31. The poor pregnant woman hit by on-duty cop case worked in an auto insurance defense firm in, you guessed it, Florida, about a decade ago. Representing a despicable insurance company against despicable chiropractors in personal injury protection cases. Personal injury protection. Like the least, most basic insurance you need to legally get your car tabs renewed in Florida. It's a shit show. $10,000 max coverage. Ambulance chasers get folks to go to the chiro they recommend. Chiro runs up $9,999 of treatment, says congrats, you're cured, clients enjoy free massages, can't fault them. But this is between the chiros and the insurance company. Chiro submits bills, insurance co-box. Chiro sues. There's thousands of these cases out there at any given time. By statute, if they recovered any money, chiros get attorney's fees. So plaintiffs' attorneys love this. Insurance company calls in the records, does a medical check, brings in dueling expert witnesses, etc. Drops bills by a couple grand. At the cost of a couple grand. Chiros get paid and free attorney payments. And the whole time they wait through this, they get 11% interest on the bill. That's right, these things are like 11% interest bonds. Chiros make money. Plaintiff and defense addies make money. Medical experts make shit tons of money doing basically nothing. Insurance company just passes the cost on to you. The whole thing is stupid. But if you want experience doing lots and lots of civil litigation defense, well, as a young attorney, anyhow, sometimes the insurance co. would want to go to trial to try and prove a point or create precedent in their favor or just hassle opposing counsel. Blow $40,000 plus fighting a bill that should be settled to $6,000. One such case was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Insured was a poor young woman of color. Driving in a slummier suburb, she pulled up to a four-way stop. At the stop, she was rear-ended in a low-speed collision by an on-duty police officer in his patrol car. Insured, is 9 months pregnant, cop rightly checks on her and calls an ambulance. She hit the steering column, so they go to the hospital to make sure she and the baby are okay, and they are fortunately. Gives birth later on no prob, kid and mom are fine, but she goes to a chiro after the accident and runs up the usual $10,000. Company wants us to go to trial on this one, under the argument of, she wasn't hurt in the accident, she just wanted post-childbirth massages. We are flabbergasted. So you want us, to subpoena this poor, literally single mother. Put her on the stand. And somehow get her to say that she wasn't hurt, she just had woman pains. And B, subpoena the police officer who hit her, and get him to say that taking her to the hospital to check up on her, being 9 months pregnant, was an unnecessary overreaction due to the low speed of the accident? A cop. Covering his ass. Do you have any idea what will look like to the jury? After like a week of this, they finally agreed to settle. I quit shortly thereafter. Now I own a brewery because being a lawyer sucks. Edit, a word. Brewery is doing fine, thanks. Make beer, sell beer, make more beer. Edit too. Wow, lots of people want to know about beer. Who would have thought? Smiley faced, so I'll make a comment below, ask questions, and I'll try to get to them, bearing in mind that soon enough I have to go to work, and make beer happen. Story 32. My mother said that at a law firm she used to work at many years ago, they had received a call from a gentleman that wanted to file a lawsuit against Walt Disney. When asked why he was filing suit, he claimed that the Disney characters were coming out of the TV and stealing food from his refrigerator. They told him they'd take the case for an advance fee of $100,000 and never heard back from him. Story 33. I used to be a forensic social worker at a public defense organization. That is, the people who provide lawyers for poor people when they get charged with crimes. You would not believe how many people believed that filing a police brutality lawsuit would result in their criminal charges going away. I mean, yes, police brutality is real. But you totally still committed a crime. Story 34. Not a lawyer but worked for a large national insurer who dealt with frivolous lawsuits frequently. Idiot is visiting friends in the country and gets drunk, decides to wander across the street to the driveway of a farm. Ignores the multiple signs that say, no trespassing and beware dog in both English and Spanish. Gets to the end of the driveway, and there's a large dog chained to a post in the front yard barking its head off at him. Farmer comes out and tells the idiot to stay away from the dog. Idiot says something to the effect that he's good with dogs, and tries to pet the dog. The dog bit off his finger, and the idiot drops his beer bottle as he runs back the way he came. Owner tries to save the finger for reattachment, but the guy disappears. And so the farmer turns everything over to the police. Shortly thereafter we denied the idiot's claim, and he lawyers up. Every time he lawyered up, we'd send the documents to the lawyer. Lawyer would review and then drop the case. Happened multiple times. Idiot insisted we needed to pay for his emotional trauma. Story 35. I had a teacher who had to take on a case where she was defending an entertainment district. And after someone was fatally attacked after getting robbed near there, she had to make the argument that it was partially her fault for parking in that poorly lit of an area. Edit. As for the argument that was made, I don't really remember if this was the argument, or if she didn't exercise due caution by going there by herself in that bad of an area. Regardless, my teacher felt awful about the argument she made, and the jury did not buy it because they were understandably very sympathetic to the family suing the entertainment district. Story 36. A master student was repeatedly attacked by his neighbor's dog, pit bull. The third time it attacked him, he had to get 6 stitches. He called the cops and they told him to call animal control. He called animal control and they told him they could only hold the dog for 12 days, then they have to give it back. So the 4th time it attacked him, he broke its teeth and ribs, then dragged the dog to the neighbor's house, opened the door and threw it inside. Very stupid on his part. When the cops arrived, the dog's owner and her roommate accused him of attacking the dog for some stupid reason. He spent 1 night in jail for criminal mischief, a Class C misdemeanor. Since he had police reports, animal control reports, pictures of his injuries, and hospital bills, his case was strong and we decided to take it. However, the new district attorney, in an attempt to further her career, tried to bump his case up to a felony. The judge threw the case out immediately and gave the guy an expunction edit. These attacks happened over the span of several months. The guy just wanted to forgive and forget until he had to get stitches. He broke the dog's teeth and ribs with his bare fists. Story 37. Guy came in and had a company build a shed on some land. On the phone, he told me it was built incorrectly. He insisted on meeting. When he got to my office, I asked him what was wrong with the building. Was it structurally deficient? Dangerous? Etc. and none of the above. Turns out it was not perfectly square with the road in front of it. It was off by a foot. You could not tell by the naked eye, but he would always know and it bugged him. I told him that without any real damages, he had no case. He stormed out angrily. Story 38. I defended a guy who was charged with theft for stealing some crowbars. The crowbars were found in the back of his pickup truck. At the trial, the victim of the theft and 2 of his buddies came in and testified that the crowbars, which had been taken into evidence and properly labeled for the trial, definitely belonged to the victim. And the buddies remembered seeing the victim use them. Then my client and his brother and his girlfriend testified that the crowbars were definitely my client's. They had all been using them together earlier in the day. That was pretty much it. The jury found my client not guilty, and one juror later wrote a letter to the judge saying that she was a high school civics teacher. And she believed jury duty was very important, and that the trial was the stupidest waste of time she had ever endured. Story 39. I hand out a lot of business cards, so they inevitably end up in the hands of some questionable people. Eventually, they found their way into the hands of Mr. Bob. That's obviously not his real name. Mr. Bob was a very unique fellow. He approached me inquiring about suing the federal government, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary of State, the entirety of Congress, and the President. This obviously put me on guard due to the ridiculousness of his request, but instead of throwing him out the door, I decided to ask why he wanted to sue the aforementioned parties. He replied that the government had kidnapped him and performed all sorts of painful experiments on him. He claimed that the government was working with the reptilians to pursue some generic evil plot against humanity as a whole. He claimed that the only reason he managed to escape was that there was a reptilian double agent who managed to spring him from his cell, and after laying low for a few years he came to me for help. At that point I was done with this conversation. I asked him to wait out in the lobby while I called the local police department to make sure this guy hadn't escaped from prison or some insane asylum. He hadn't. After I got off the phone, I went back over to Mr. Bill and told him that if the government officials were working under the reptilians, then that meant they would have revoked their American citizenship and thus were only subject to intergalactic law. Since I only specialize in the American law practice, I couldn't help him. He seemed really disappointed, but he left without making any fuss. Yeah, that was both the best and worst day of my career. Makes for an interesting story at parties, though. Story 40, mostly just really stupid clients. But it's not always obvious until they become your clients. I did have a guy call me and meet me at a bar. He didn't sound nuts on the phone, because he wanted me to sue his ex-wife, who he was already suing, sue the opposing counsel, the judge for putting his children in danger by giving ex-wife custody, his church for kicking him out since his ex got a restraining order, his bank for giving his ex-wife access to their joint accounts which she drained, his cell phone company for not letting him cancel her number before the divorce decree was finalized, and the doctor for diagnosing him as paranoid schizophrenic because they were all colluding together to destroy his life. Oh. And the best part is that he wanted me to take on all this work for contingency only, saying, "There's a lot of meat on these bones. We can go halvesies on whatever you win." I remember specifically that he said, "Go halvesies." I hope it's needless to say, but I did not take this client on. This video does not promote illegal activity. It is shared for commentary and educational purposes.